I can't help but wonder what the response would be if, when I heard about women who, for whatever reason, were planning on giving birth in the hospital, I made it a practice to ask her how she would feel if her baby died as a result of her so irresponsibly putting her trust in her doctor. Because, of course, most doctors, nurses, and midwives are fairly ignorant of what constitutes physiological birth and are primarily in the business of enacting abusive, highly unscientific, evidence-free, and counterproductive policies and standard procedures. Would it be appropriate, I wonder, to ask those women, how would you live with yourself? To those women whose babies have, in fact, died after following their doctor's advice or after having given birth in the hospital where they and their infants are routinely abused and where their babies are given dangerous drugs and separated from them to be put into little glass boxes and subjected to environments and substances and treatments that render their tiny bodies highly vulnerable to dis-ease and death. How can you live with yourself? How can you live with yourself given that you've naively accepted the obvious propaganda and misinformation that has nonetheless convinced you that hospital interventions are universally life-saving, as opposed to often being the cause of complications and emergency situations? How can you live with yourself, given that you made choices that probably led to your baby's death, debilitation, or at the very least to their having been harmed? How can all those women live with themselves after they've willingly entered that cult institution, the hospital, risking their babies' lives, yes, but almost guaranteeing that their babies, if they survive, will emerge with lifelong trauma? How do you women live with yourselves? That's the question that Sabrina Gretchen recently asked me publicly on my Instagram feed in response to my recent post about paddleboarding after my waters had opened and how excited and delighted I am with the fact that my birth process has begun and I'm waiting patiently for my baby to be born in bliss in my home. I have a feeling that all those people who have now publicly predicted that my baby died and who are already clearly chuffed about having the opportunity to ask me how I can live with myself, I think those people would be horrified if that same question were asked with that same degree of sanctimony and contempt of women who've followed all the rules and all the protocols and who've submitted to their obstetrician's better judgment, but whose babies have, for whatever reason, died anyway. Now, this isn't really a conversation about birth choices. This is a conversation about fundamental values and faith and one's deepest spiritual orientation and belief system. It's a conversation also about how the allopathic system actually functions. It's a conversation about Rona. And while my lowest self obviously desperately wants to focus on the small-mindedness and viciousness of these people, their moral decrepitude and the dull stupidity in their obvious enjoyment as they piously air their unwarranted superiority. But what I also recognize is that these people are deeply damaged. They're so broken and so angry and, as usual, so envious that they are preemptively, eagerly, just itching to burn me at the stake, despite not actually having received confirmation that my baby's dead. Very sad creatures that you are. Imagine if women loved themselves enough to love other women, even women who've made choices that are different than yours. Even women who might have made mistakes. Imagine if we all actually could live with ourselves and with each other in our messiness and in our imperfections. Imagine if, instead of lashing out at women whose choices trigger our own feelings of inferiority and terror, you could feel that and just acknowledge that You're scared. You're scared of birth. You're scared of death. You're scared of life. And that seeing me, or any woman who isn't scared, reminds you of everything you're missing out on. Anyway, to everyone who's reached out to me with love over the past week, thank you so much. And to all those who've written to accuse me of killing my child, thank you as well. I really am continuously inspired by the love and the hate. And I do have a little announcement to make when I'm ready, so hang in there.